buenas noches, Lu. Gracias por estar en el canal. Bienvenido, bienvenido ya en la traducción nuevamente. Bueno, es de vital importancia abarcar en resumen toda la carrera de Lu, que ha sido muy extensa, pero yo quisiera preguntarle sobre los inicios. ¿Cómo fue la experiencia en poder participar en 3 Days and Acts of Worship? Y también cómo describe la evolución de su trabajo en la dirección de fotografía.
Hello, Luke. Welcome to John Jatenjor's interviews. So first of all, we want to ask you a few questions and also to celebrate your filmography, which is quite extensive from what we can see. And the first question would be, how would you define the evolution of your work as a cinematographer, and what do you remember from your early days working on 3 Days and Acts of Worship?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm honored. Yeah, what I remember from those early films that I did, Acts of Worship was a wonderful production. It was a very special film. It was put together largely by people who had met in a drug addiction rehabilitation program, and because of that, it was very dear to the people who made it, and there was a lot of heart in it. So it was important that we gave a very genuine portrayal of what it's like to live on the streets as a drug addict in New York City. And 3 Days was also a special film that was much more amorphous. And I think how I operate hasn't really changed too much. I think I've just gotten better at all the things that I instinctually did early on, and I just honed them more. But I think I've stayed fairly true to my instincts and my general proclivities and general leanings of how to make a film and how to stay true to the subject, and to show the humanity in it, and to try to have people react not by being manipulated but by showing the essence of the characters and what's going on as truthfully as possible. And the entertainment level comes because you're choosing those different moments of authenticity. So I'm always trying to supply the editor with the material that they need to put together the best film. So I'm always editing in my head. I do very little editing, actually, but I do a lot of editing in my head when I'm collecting material. I see the filmmaking process largely as one of what editing processes, right? Like you have all your raw material, and then you edit it down to your 90 minutes or however long your film is. And before that, there's the script writing, or in a documentary, there's the biggest funnel, which is all of reality, all of what's happening around you, and you have to choose. The cinematographer has to choose what subjects they're going to capture and how. So it's a big funnel for from anything that's happening all around you, the entire production, into what gets on camera. So yeah, I think I've just gotten better at lighting and better at handheld work and better at just honing the whole filmmaking process. And I think the biggest change is not one that you can see on camera. It's one of temperament. I think I used to be very emotional when I was starting out, and I've learned that as important as the film that you're creating is the experience of making that film and how you are to other people. And I've tried to get better at that, but it's difficult because I take it very seriously, and emotions run high, because we all take it very seriously, and it's important to us to make the best thing possible.
La segunda pregunta es, ¿cómo lo captura la esencia, respetando, a pesar de los fines políticos, el tema de mantener la neutralidad en dos de las historias más importantes e impactantes, que es del cine, que es Las Par 2000 y Fahrenheit 11.9, que son muy buenos?
So, look, the next question would be, how would you maintain your essence in cinematography, especially in politically driven films such as Last Part 2000 and Fahrenheit 11.9? Yeah, because sometimes, as you know, like cinematographers, when they have like a different array of projects, most of the times they have to adapt to what the director or the producers need. But there are so many cinematographers, let's say Roger Deakins or Craig Fraser, who are able to maintain like their own aesthetic and style, regardless of the genre.
I understand. It's funny that there's two different minds going on. One is that I pride myself in being extremely flexible, and I work on a wildly different array of things, between a Muppets movie, a Borat film, a Victoria's Secret commercial, a design film on Helvetica, on like a typeface, or wildly different. And they're all very, and like OK Go video, which is all very, very challenging in its own way, but very totally different way. And I've always enjoyed that. I actually like not being specialized and not being pigeonholed into one style or even one type of filmmaking. So the commonality comes from just my general instincts and sensibility. I mean, I love handheld. I find it a really special tool, because it really, I almost get into character. Like I'm a person in the room witnessing what's going on, because I'm responsible for looking at what the audience needs to see at what time, and doing it instinctually, and doing it in a way that's not distracting. You want to be where you want to be, at the where you would want to be, rather. But also conveying what's important when it's important, and doing it in a very fluid way, and almost like being a witness to what's going on. And I love that mode in everything, in documentary and narrative, because it adds this level of authenticity. And I think that's the commonality in my work, I think, is trying, it's without artifice, right? It's not fakery. That's not something I strive for, in order to fake somebody. I strive for making an environment that is real and communicates a true thing as much as possible, and extracting that out and putting that on camera. And that's that to me is the highest achievement that I'm striving for, is to try to bring out the authenticity of what's going on. And that authenticity might be the actors pulling out their best performance, or their most compelling performance, or in a documentary, picking out little moments that are very telling and very true. You asked me before about the evolution since my earlier documentaries, and I would say what really has changed is actually in the industry. When I started doing documentaries, it was largely exploratory. You would start with a concept, with an idea, and I would be brought on, and we would start to film it. And about 2 weeks in or so, or like in, maybe a tenth in, a fifth into the film, the film would the story would take its own direction. It would really be, it would start to tell us what it wanted to say, and we had to adjust what's going on, and we would find meaning in everyday occurrences, just being a fly on the wall, just being in a space and witnessing a character just doing their thing was very telling. And you can usually extrapolate or extract out, the audience can read certain things into someone's everyday behavior. You can read an amazing amount within 30 seconds of just witnessing someone. And now there's this shift, which I find very cowardly, which is the people funding the documentaries need to have it all explained out to them, all laid out so they can read it all with the story structure and exactly what happens. And it's all played out in a very predictable, bankable way. And they can see that this works and now you can go and shoot it. But that's not documentary. That's documenting the inside of someone's head who's sitting at a computer just coming up what they think is going to happen. That's not exploratory. That's not commenting on anybody but the person who's doing the research and the writing. So I always push to get those verite moments, like real verite moments. And that word is thrown around a lot, but the true verite is very telling. And it's used less and less. And I've always tried to push for that and try to get that authenticity and engage the audience with them reading into a character, because we all can read people very well. We all do this every day. So when you see somebody on camera who's just making an omelet, you can kind of tell a lot about them. So that's something that's really changed since I started. So I always try to get back to true verite. I'm not sure if I answered your question about the essence. Oh yeah. No, I think I did.
You actually did it very well. So thank you, Luke, for that.
Hay algo importante, es que cuando él habló sobre los temas acerca de dos de las historias más importantes referente a documental y película política, ahora se habla sobre la sátira política. Él fue el director de fotografía de las dos de Borat. Entonces, representar algo supremamente, el humor negro, ahí, como, bueno, define la experiencia en estas dos historias, que es, todos acá en Latinoamérica la conocen.
You were mentioning us in the previous question that amongst your body of work was a little movie called Borat. And one of the things that I think since the early 2000s got a lot of strength was the political satire. And obviously, Borat is an outlandish character that basically came in the right moment twice. So we wanted to ask you, what was your experience of photographing the Borat films? And how do you feel about political satire in film?
Shooting the Borat films was like no other experience. It was not like any other filmmaking experience. I joke that it drew on about 20% of my skills as a cinematographer and about 80% as a juvenile delinquent. You know what that is? It's like being a troubled kid who gets in trouble. Because it was you had to be very brave to do those films, because we get ourselves in particularly difficult situations intentionally, and you have to be pretty fearless. But they're an amazing adventure and very exciting, and you only get one shot at it, which draws on my documentary instincts, and everybody we hire is a good documentarian. They have to really be very assured with their tools. They have to know their tools inside and out, and use them fluidly, and be fearless, and know how to document a scene, and know editing, because we're only going to get it once. And the part that's tricky about it is that you're also, again, playing a part in a way, because you can't really let on that you're doing what you're doing to the subject. So not only do you have to capture the right material, you have to not show what you're doing, which is surprisingly difficult to do. It's one of many things that are difficult. And also, Sasha's method in general is one that changes quite a bit all the time. It's always changing. And it keeps us on our toes, and it always stays very spontaneous. He changes things very last minute, and we always have to keep up. And it lends itself to a style that feels very spontaneous and very almost accidental. All those films look like we jumped out of a van and just pointed the camera, when an immense amount of planning goes into it, an immense amount of research and drills and planning and just shooting things many times with many different people to see what works better, and tons of material just never sees the light of day and gets thrown out. So it's a totally unique process. The pre-production process is very different. Like normally you script the film, you plan how to do that film, and then every day you go out and shoot as much as you possibly can. This one is much more like, let's try this. Okay, that worked. Let's try to do the scene that comes before it. Okay, that didn't work, or that worked better. So now we have to change the other one. And so it's a lot of patchwork to put those films together. So they take a long time. We take a lot of breaks between them, and they're very fun. They're extremely challenging. What was the beginning part of that question? Was the Borat things, but political satire. When Michael Moore asked me to shoot Fahrenheit 11/9, I was super honored. I actually wanted to do Where Should We Invade Next, the previous film on comparing Europe and the United States, basically challenging the idea that the United States is the greatest country ever, when anybody who's been outside of the United States knows this is not true. It has some serious holes. The United States is great in its own way, but usually people who say that have not been outside of the United States. And so it was, and I really, really wanted to do that film because I grew up with a lot of my family in Switzerland. And so we would go back and forth and constantly compare these European sensibilities, and then come back to the States. And I would come back to school and hear this thing about United States being the best country in the world. And I was like, not so sure about that. So anyway, Michael Moore, it was an honor when Michael Moore asked me to shoot Fahrenheit 11/9, because Michael Moore is responsible, in my mind, for making documentaries that don't assume the attention of the audience. He takes responsibility for making a documentary entertaining as well. He doesn't assume that the audience is going to be obliged to watch this film. Before that, you would make a documentary because it was an important cause, it was an important subject, and based on that, you hoped that audiences would come. And turns out not that many people watch documentaries before Michael Moore. So Michael really opened the whole political satire and the whole comedic elements with real facts, and really challenging your sensibilities, and doing a wonderful documentary and putting them together. It makes a very entertaining and educational film that's really eye-opening. So he's terrific at that. So when he asked me many years later to do that film, I was super honored. But I think political satire is extremely important. We take a lot of news very seriously, and sometimes the best disarming method is to make fun of it, right? I mean, to call Donald Trump a loser, for instance, or stupid is something that gets under his skin, and to show how silly something is, to show how silly something is very poignant, right? You could get a Harvard professor to make their case about a certain issue, right? And it would probably be a very good case in the court of law, but as an audience, it really doesn't hold much weight. But if you can make fun of something and you can tap into this delicate little thing we call comedy that makes you laugh, and the reason it makes you laugh is because you're slightly uncomfortable, but it's true, and that's usually evokes the spontaneous laughter, right? So when you've made somebody laugh, you're onto a certain truth. So truth and comedy are very tied. They're very linked in a way. So I think political satire is extremely important, and I track politics and what's going on in the world quite a bit. So when those two things can be put together, I'm very happy, and I feel like I'm bringing good things to the world.
Well, sometimes when you watch the news, you ask yourself if this is a movie, but sadly, it's reality. And sometimes it's even funnier than the movies.
Right. But when you watch the news, it's usually not funny. But if you can make fun of how insane it is, it's a release also. It's a way of releasing the tension that one builds up watching things that could be quite angering, like the last month.
Bueno, hablar sobre Bora y hablar sobre otros proyectos, vamos a referenciar el tema de temáticas con asesinos seriales. Es muy complicado referenciar varias porque ha hecho para las mejores documentales referente a ello. Así que, ¿cómo ha causado el impacto de su estilo de fotografía y no solo mantener neutralidad con ello y que genere emociones como algo de impacto, algo de llena de impotencia? Entonces, ¿cómo ha sido de esas dos producciones? La más importante de él, porque la de Killer Robert One fue nominado al Emmy.
All right. So, on a very interesting turn of events, we go from satire to more serious subject matters, because amongst your filmography, we also see that you have worked on documentaries about one phenomenon that has always been present in society, which is unfortunately the phenomenon of serial killers.
Yeah.
So how has your photography style adapted to these type of documentaries? For example, we have Conversations with a Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, and Who Killed Robert One, which John was mentioning. I believe it won an Emmy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So now that we went from like doing commercials, working from what the Muppets, Victoria's Secrets, the Borat movies, and with Michael Moore as well, how was your experience, and how were you able to adapt your style, and how it affected you in a way to work on documentaries that treat these very delicate subject matters?
Yeah, true crime is an ethically tricky medium, or ethically tricky subject, because you don't want to normalize the behavior, and yet there's this unbelievable, insatiable human curiosity about what is going on with this person. So my approach is to lean. It's often like bending the ear of the director a little bit, or trying to again get to the truth of things. But for true crime, I often, every project I take on, I ask myself a couple questions, like, what can I do that's advancing my skill set in this film, in this undertaking? And two, more importantly, what am I bringing to the world? Like, what am I putting out there? What am I waking up and working on for endless hours and releasing into the world? And is it a good thing? And how can it be a better thing or a good thing? And true crime is always a little tricky because the people who make true crime aren't entirely sure why it's so popular, which is a very strange thing. They actually don't totally understand this. And I've asked countless people who are super into true crime, like, well, why? What do you like about it? And they can never really answer it satisfactorily, or with any certainty. So I think my approach with true crime is to try to actually humanize the killer in a way. And that's not to give them sympathy, but it's to humanize them so you can relate to them and you can understand them and you can move forward in the world, understanding how the human psyche can go off the rails and what human beings are capable of, actually, which I think is just psychologically very interesting and poignant. I think psychology and filmmaking is also like very tied together. People who study psychology and then they go into filmmaking, I always like that. I'm like, oh, great, yeah, because you're interested in how the mind works and how we make these flickering pictures with audio on them that are meant to stimulate certain thoughts and ideas and but not to spoon feed them to you, but rather to give you an array of images and stories and ideas and let you make the conclusion. So for true crime, I think it's always important not to other, even though they've committed heinous crimes. I mean, crimes that are unthinkable. I think it's still important to humanize them in a way. And I would probably have a hard time having this conversation with a victim of one of these killers, but I have to maintain that I think it's still important to understand the human being behind that. Again, not for sympathy, but for understanding about who we are as human beings. And so I'm always trying to push for that and make it less about like, look how much of a freak this person is. Because to me, that's not valuable. That's nonsense. We understand that. You can read that like you've murdered 18 people. Okay, well, that's extreme. And to lay off the details of exactly how it was done or something like that, and get more into like what makes that person tick, why they went so far afield with their own psychology. So anything I can gather that tells that story, I'm always trying to gather that, and then of course I give it to the editor and I surrender it to them, and of course they do what they want with the director, but I always try to at least give them the material to tell that story as much as possible.
Por último, ¿cómo define todo su trabajo en una palabra?
Well, look, we're almost at the end of our interview. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. It has been very interesting to see the many phases of your career. And we want to ask you one final question, and it would be, how would you define your career in one single word?
Oh, wow. That's a lot of encapsulation. I can encapsulate it in a word that addresses what I strive for, and that is honesty. I try to show what's truly how human beings work, and who we are. And if that can give insight into people personally and societally, then I've done my job.
Thank you for your very honest answer, Luke.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, hello, Andres. Thank you for your involvement in this, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Este es tu espacio, Luke, para que digas redes sociales y un saludo para Colombia para finalizar la foto.
And last but not least, Luke, please share with us your social media. Where can we find you? And also, if you want to say hello to Colombia and to the many people that will watch this interview and the many cinematographers who are interested in documentaries and fiction and want to know more about the field from an expert like you, you can say hello to them as well.
Yeah, well, hello, Colombia. I hope you keep making films and showing the world who you are and learning about the rest of the world and doing your thing. You're a wonderful country. I've never been there, but everybody I know who's traveled there says, "Oh, you have to go to Colombia. You'll love Colombia." So I hope to make it there soon sometime.
And your social media, please. Where can we find you?
Oh, I actually am very social media inactive, actually, but my Instagram is dplukerg, and my website is my name, lukegeissbuhler.com.
Gracias por la oportunidad. Un fuerte abrazo y mucho éxito. Take care.
De nada. Gracias.
Gracias,
Thanks,
Jan,
Luke.
por la traducción y bueno, mucho éxito. Hasta luego. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.